Hi everybody, welcome to episode 31 of the Photography Explained podcast. In this episode, what are the different camera modes? I'm your host Rick, and each week I'll try to explain one photographic thing to you in plain English in less than 10 minutes without the irrelevant details. My aim is to explain things in just enough detail to help you and I with our photography, and no more. I'm a professionally qualified photographer based in England with a lifetime of photographic experience which I share with you on my podcast. What does camera mode mean? Here is my answer. Camera modes fall into three categories: automatic modes, semi-automatic modes, and manual mode. I say manual mode because there's only one. In manual mode, you choose all the settings. In semi-automatic modes, you choose one setting and the camera chooses the others. And in automatic modes, the camera chooses all the settings. The settings in camera modes determine the success of the image capture exposure. Now, this is a generalization. Of course, there are more refinements, subtleties. There's more to this than just that, but that is the general explanation of camera modes. Sorry, I was beginning to waffle a bit then. On my Canon 6D, which I've been using for a long old time now, I have the following modes. Now this is an interesting one because there is one thing with three letters called SCN. So it's got three letters, SCN, and I've never used it. So I had to look into this to find out what it was. And you know what? It's called special scene modes apparently. I'm saying apparently here because even though I've had the camera for, 7, 8 years and I've taken 50, 100,000 photos with it, I have never selected this mode. Like I say, I had to look it up. So what does it have in there? It has these different scene modes: portrait, landscape, close-up, sports, night portrait, handheld night scene, HDR backlight control. How excellent. I might try some of these. What else has it got? The Canon 6D also has, wait for it, Scene Intelligent Auto, Creative Auto, Programmed Auto Exposure, Aperture Priority, Shutter Priority, Manual, Bulb, C1 and C2. Let's have a look at some of these then. So going back to these special scene modes, the portrait one will give you a wide open aperture, probably about an f5.6. It will set an aperture that suits a portrait. So you're not going fully open. You'll be stopping down a little bit, but you want to get a blurry background. But you don't want just the eyes in focus and the rest of the head. So that will deal with that one. Landscape, probably looking to set you a wider aperture. And it's working with the ISO, aperture. And obviously all these modes are using ISO, shutter speed and aperture for that type of photo. I'm going to come on to genres of photos in another episode. Close up, probably make it wide open and give you the fastest shutter speed it can by adjusting the aperture. Sports will give you the fastest shutter speed it can by adjusting the aperture and the ISO. See, this is how the exposure triangle works. The camera's using that in these targeted modes. Night portrait. I haven't got a clue how that would work. What would night portrait do? I don't really know. Should have looked into this, shouldn't I? Still, I don't take portraits. I certainly don't take portraits at night. Handheld night scene. Yeah, that's just giving you the best chance of getting a sharp photo at night, handheld. Personally, I'd use a tripod. I wouldn't rely on the camera to do that. HDR backlight control. Absolutely no idea what that is. No idea. Should I know about that? Oh, it doesn't matter, does it? Let's not forget, this is about explaining things just enough to help you with your photography. I'm not worried about some of these modes. I'm never going to use them. If you do, then give them a practice. What else have we got? Scene Intelligent Auto, Creative Auto, Programmed Auto Exposure, Aperture Priority. That's what I use. For my architectural photography, my construction photography work, nearly got photography wrong then, quite a concern. I will set my ISO at 100. I will set my aperture to the aperture I need for the photograph, which 95 times out of 100 is f8 or f16. Shutter speed I don't care about because my camera's on a tripod. And that's what I do for 99% of my photography work. That's also how I work when I'm photographing sunrises and what have you. So I tend to use aperture priority. Shutter priority. Set the shutter speed. Camera sets the aperture. Manual, you set both, but as you're doing what the camera's meter says, you might as well use one of the other ones. Bulb, press the shutter release button, the shutter opens. Release this, which you need a device to do, or press the shutter release again, which you can't do if you're handheld because you're going to make the camera move, so you need to use a remote release. Back in the day, you used to stick a cable into the shutter release. These days, it's a bit more technologically advanced. So if you use a remote release or if you use a remote release, you press it once, the shutter opens. You can press it again after 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 10 minutes, 12 hours, whatever, to get the correct exposure, depending on the darkness of the scene and other stuff around. Dead handy, actually. It's a really good one to use. I'm going to do that in a separate episode. Finally, C1 and C2. Now, the Canon 6D has these custom functions where you can set things. Personally, I hate them because they're so complicated and convoluted, so I've never really used them other than one that I will add to the list because I've just thought about it, which is called back button focus. Don't worry about it now. So, other camera manufacturers no doubt have similar modes. Some will have other modes. There will be more recent, cleverer modes, I am sure, because the Canon 6D is quite an old camera. Point of this really is use these modes to help you take better photos. If you're not sure how to take a portrait photo, use the portrait mode, use the landscape mode. There's nothing wrong with using these, but what you need to do is study how the camera is selecting the settings and then try and apply them to getting yourself into manual mode or aperture or shutter priority. They do say you're not a real photographer unless you can shoot in manual. Now, I don't like the snobbery of that, but I agree with the principle that you should be able take photos in manual. Doesn't mean you have to, but you should understand enough. Like I say, I don't use manual. I use aperture priority. It works for me, so whatever works for you. Don't be afraid of using these clever, creative modes. Program mode is fine. In fact, the program mode on a Canon with a big P, you can adjust the exposure anyway using the quick control dial. So there's lots to do. But it goes back to something that I said in a previous episode. To learn your camera, you have to really learn it. So you have to go through the manual, start to finish, or buy one book. Not saying which book, just don't buy 5 books. Buy one book, work through it, pick out the bits you need to do. But these modes are fundamentals of the camera that can help you. I mean, I haven't used them because I went from a Canon 5D to a Canon 6D. I was fully conversant with the 5D years and years ago because I've used that for years. So I didn't need to use these because I'd like to think relatively advanced as a photographer. So yeah, don't worry about it. Why are there so many modes? These modes are here to cater for individual abilities, experiences, technical preferences, time and convenience. Now I might use AV, aperture priority, aperture value by the way. I might use aperture priority on a shoot, but I might use program if I'm out and about taking photos. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, I'm done here. Quick recap. Exposure is the amount of light that reaches the camera sensor. Spot the deliberate fault there? That is from the last episode. Camera modes. There are 3 types of camera modes: automatic, semi-automatic, manual. Each of these modes is a different way of getting an exposure when you take a photograph. Pick the one that works for you and use it. Try all the others out, you never know. In fact, now I've said all this, I think I'm going to give some of these on my Canon 6D, go and see what they can do. Right, I'm done. What's next? Come on to that in a minute. What do I want you to do now? Try a camera mode you've never used before. That was number 1. Number 2. Tell me how it went on Twitter @RickPhoto. 3. Subscribe to my podcast if you enjoyed this episode. This helps me. Number 4. Rate and review my podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, that is. This helps me too. Number 5. Tell someone you know about my podcast. This helps me. Costs you nothing apart from a small amount of time. And you never know. You might find somebody learning along with the rest of us. Next episode. Yeah, I've not updated my notes here. This one says I'm going to explain different image capture modes. Oh dear. Next episode, I am going to talk about the different types of photography. Now, the title might well be an A to Z of photography genres, but I'm not going to do 26 episodes because Z will be zoo photography. I'm not going to do that. Running over here a lot, which is a surprise because I thought this was going to be a light episode. That's good. I enjoyed this. Thank you for listening to my small but perfectly formed podcast. Check out my website, rickmcavoyphotography.com, where you can find out all about me and my architectural and construction photography work, as well as my blog, where you can learn lots more about photography. And also now, as of last week, of Tuesday, check out the Photography Explained podcast web pages. Website, I nearly got there. Finally, let me know if you want me to explain something. Head over to my website, photographyexplained.com. You'll find the tile. Click on it. It just takes you to the email link. I'm not going to lie to you. Let me know. I'll add it to the list. You can check the list out. Lots of other good stuff on there. And you can read all the transcripts. That's a word I need to learn for the next episode. This episode was brought to you by the power of, incompetence, I guess. I've been Rick McEvoy. Thanks again for listening to me and for giving me 10 minutes of your valuable time. I seriously do appreciate it. And I will see you on the next episode. Cheers from me, Rick.